We made this.
Hello and welcome to Life's Milestones, a new podcast on the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host. My name's Mark Adams and I am a Humanist Celebrant. That means that I do non-religious naming ceremonies, weddings and funerals. And this is my podcast about birth and naming ceremonies, relationships and weddings, and death and funerals. Once a fortnight I have a different guest from different walks of life come along and we have a chat about all of those three milestones in their lives. The show takes a different format depending on whether or not people have children, or whether or not people have got married, or whether or not people have experienced death in their lives. But essentially the format does tend to stay the same, but with a different guest and a different perspective every time. I've got a number of fantastic interviews already pre-recorded and headed your way. These include Chris Clough from the Torside Brewery, Kat Allen from Noodle Performing Arts, Fraser Summers, a TV journalist for KMTV in Kent, and Guy Otten, a Humanist Celebrant himself, but he's also a Humanist Chaplain too. Initially, I was planning on having Chris Clough as the first episode. However, Chris is on furlough at the moment due to the COVID-19 situation, and that means he's unable to engage with social media or anything else to do with his brewery at the moment. So I decided to nudge Chris down the list, and we'll have his interview at a later date. As such, I've brought forward Guy Otten, who was my mentor when I was training as a funeral celebrant. Guy is a fantastic and interesting man who has a lot of stories from his 72 years on this planet. Guy is probably the oldest person I will interview on this podcast. And initially I was hoping to do like a dual perspective thing with him following on from Ethan Allen, who is an 18-year-old professional wrestler. And I was hoping that we could have the contrast between the two of them. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get Ethan's interview recorded before the coronavirus situation happened. So Ethan will be on the show at some point, but with everything the way it is, I just don't know when yet. As I say, I've got 3 more interviews after Guy's to put up for you, and I'm hoping that by the time those have all gone up, I'll have the opportunity to get out and about and record some more episodes. So, like I say, Guy Otten is your first guest, and I hope you enjoy the interview with Guy. With me at this time is Guy Otten. Hello, Guy.
Hiya.
Welcome to the Life's Milestones podcast. You are following Ethan Allen, who is my youngest guest so far, and without wishing to be rude, I suspect you're going to be my oldest guest. How old are you?
I'm 72.
Okay.
And a half.
72 and a half. Very Adrian Mole.
Nearly 3/4. Because my birthday's in July.
Right. And so where are you from and what's your background?
Well, I was born in Stanmore, Middlesex, but Middlesex has been abolished since. I'm talking geographically now.
Right.
I never lived around there because my dad was in the Navy and we moved around, so I'm don't have a place like that. I've lived for about 50 years in Manchester, so
surely Manchester's your home.
I think I'm naturalised.
Yeah, well, me too. I moved here in 97, and so it means I've lived here longer than I lived in Wolverhampton, where I'm from. But when people ask me, where are you from? Sometimes I don't know, is it Wolverhampton or is it Manchester? Would you say you're Mancunian?
Well, I don't sound like a Mancunian, so, I'm kind of happy with not necessarily having to say that I'm from anywhere. I don't have that need.
I like the idea that I've earned my Manchester citizenship by being here my entire adult life, you know?
Well, I mean, I've got 4 children who are all born in Manchester.
And do they consider themselves Mancunian?
Well, they do, yes. I think they speak with a bit of a Manchester, not a heavy accent, but a bit of an accent.
A twang.
A bit of a twang. And my mother, who was a floppy-hatted Tory philanthropist, said to me, "Oh, please don't let your children have a Manchester accent."
Good grief. I don't think that's really under your control, is it?
No.
I mean, we are going to be talking about that sort of thing later on in the podcast, but before we do, what do you do that makes you interesting? This is very much a loaded question, because if you don't sell yourself enough, I will tell everyone how brilliant you are.
Well, I suppose I'm a humanist celebrant, as you are, of course.
Indeed.
I've been doing it since 2012. I do weddings, funerals and namings. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a humanist chaplain. In my case, I go to a mental health unit.
Right.
I sit with people, talk about what they want to talk about. It's their agenda. They often have worries, fears, confusions, quite apart from mental health worries and concerns and psychoses that they want to talk about. I call it existential issues that I'm interested in.
Right.
A religious person might call it spiritual.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing I do, I think.
Yeah, so the Humanist Chaplain, do you feel that the term chaplain is loaded? Would you maybe use or is there a alternative non-religious term for that?
Yes, I mean, the Humanist UK, who run the Humanist Chaplaincy Network, don't like the word chaplain, and they say we should be calling ourselves pastoral support workers.
Right.
But even pastoral has religious connotations.
Yeah, I presume it comes from the word pastor.
Yeah, which means shepherd.
Right.
So it's treating people as sheep.
Oh, look. Oh,
so
dear,
I don't really go with that word either.
No, that seems problematic as well.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, chaplain is it's a religious word, but if we're going to do something that's similar to what religious people do in some senses, we might as well just adopt the terminology. Everyone understands what it means.
Yeah, true.
And Buddhist chaplains are chaplains. Muslim chaplains are chaplains. Even though the word chaplain has Christian connotations.
Yeah, I think it's probably more important that the work is done rather than the semantics of a name, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think so.
As a humanist celebrant, how do you respond when people call you a priest or ask you to do blessings and things like that?
I've never been called a priest.
I've been called a faithless priest to my face.
Right, okay, right. Faith-free priest, I would rephrase it straight away. I have been paid for my funerals with cheques made out to the Reverend Guy Otten.
The Reverend? Could you actually cash that cheque?
Yeah. But,
brilliant.
It doesn't do... I don't think it does my atheist street cred much good.
No.
But it's quite funny.
Yeah. The Reverend.
And of course, when you go to do a funeral at a crematorium, you park in the clergy parking spot.
Yes.
And you go into the vestry.
You do.
To hang your coat up and stuff.
Yeah, you do.
So, you've got all this, and you're standing at the pulpit.
Yeah.
And, you've got to check if you can remove the cross, but that's just about everything else is. Anyway, the other thing I possibly do that might be interesting is that I'm involved in Greater Manchester Humanists again. Mm-hmm. I'm vice chair. You
do an incredible amount of work with regards to humanism, and that's something I very much admire of you. So talk about Manchester Humanists.
Well, Greater Manchester Humanists has been in existence since the 50s, although they had a break in the 60s for a few years. The current group has really amazingly expanded since I joined 20-odd years ago. Mm-hmm. When it was just one meeting, 1 month of a few old codgers sitting around. Now we've got meetings like 2 or 3, sometimes some weeks, most weeks we have at least one. Social and sort of speaker meetings and discussion groups and choirs and things like this.
I mean, I wanted to ask you about your work with humanist or non-religious, atheist, whatever you want to call it, asylum seekers, and the fact that you use your legal background to help these people. How did that happen? And is it something that you already, you just naturally fell into?
I'm not sure if I do particularly use it, to be honest. I mean, I am a lawyer by background, but the humanist group has always had a number of ex-Muslims as well as ex-Christians and ex-Jews and Scientologists and ex-cult people who've joined it because they find it as a community that gives them something they need once they've got out of the community of that religion that they no longer support. So we've had a whole a whole stream of ex-Muslim asylum seekers, and once we're satisfied that they are genuine, we're very happy to go to the tribunal or write letters to them to the Home Office saying, this person is a member of our community, we're satisfied he's a genuine atheist and humanist or whatever, and then maybe give them, flesh out a little bit of the things he's done and attended, or she, in some cases. Because that's the issue that sometimes the Home Office have a problem with.
Right.
The country danger, the fact that in some places apostasy from Islam is punishable by death, in other cases it's at least punishable by imprisonment, that's well known and understood, and the tribunals, the immigration tribunals, have that information before them in the form of expert advice and guidance. So that's not an issue. The issue is, are they genuinely atheists?
Right.
Or are they just trying it on?
Right.
We don't find that we have people trying it on, but we have had one or two people that we are doubtful about and we've not really supported.
Right, okay.
But most of the people are pretty enthusiastic, and some of them are, so enthusiastic they're kind of the mainstay of some of our meetings,
And I believe you're also a candidate for the Green Party as well.
Yes. I mean, the trouble is I've just moved from Salford to Rochdale, and in Salford I was chair of Salford Green Party and a candidate in a target ward.
I was in that target ward, and I was going to vote for you, Guy.
I know, it's sad, really.
So you're not doing that anymore, is it?
Well, I think I might still be on the local register, in which case I might just do it.
Well, you've got my vote if you do.
But because it's an all-out election, there are three of us, and there are two other candidates, and so all three of us are going to be standing. Do you know what I mean? You get 3 votes.
Yes.
Except that, of course, I've forgotten, because the elections this year have been cancelled. So it'll be next year.
Man.
So I won't be on the register then. So I'm afraid my candidacy has to fall.
But there will be someone else from the Green Party.
Oh, yeah.
But you are pretty passionate about the Green Party. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm passionate about the need to change our economy and our society so that we live sustainably within the resources of the planet. I mean, it seems a very obvious thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it's taking a while to get through, and there are people who think it's a hoax, and it is not. It's obvious, really.
It's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think even recently my political opinions have morphed into more green and more sustainable, being more important to me than other issues. I'm currently trying vegetarianism for the first time in my life, and
I'm doing that as well.
I will never quit cheese. I can't quit cheese.
I love cheese,
but
I think I can do without most meat. I'm finding meat not a problem.
Yeah.
And I've read so much about meat recently that I'm thinking, there are lots of interesting dishes that can be had.
And frankly, Guy, the fact that you are so passionate about the Green Party has made me think more and do more research. And you are an incredibly positive influence on my life. You were my funeral mentor while I was training in funerals for my celebrant job. And you are a remarkable man, and you were one of the very first people I was like, right, I want him on this podcast. So I'm glad we're sat here, and I'm glad we're doing this. So thanks again for coming on board.
Well, thank you for that.
So let's move on and talk about birth. When and where and how were you born?
Through the vagina, I believe.
Oh. I've literally just said what a great man you are, and then you're really crude. You are a very literal person.
I was born at the outset of the National Health Service in 1947.
Right.
And apparently in a maternity home that was set up for the baby boomers.
Right.
And it was in a country house in Stanmore, Middlesex, which had been given to the National Health Service by Attlee, I believe.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so I'm told.
Clement Attlee, the former Prime Minister, right?
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. And my mother was actually living in Bath with my dad, who was working at the Admiralty, because he was in the Navy in Bath. She chose to go to give birth there because she wanted her brother-in-law, who was a surgeon, to attend her birth, my birth. So he delivered me.
So your uncle
weird.
Delivered you?
Yeah. So
Amazing.
I think that's a bit weird, to be honest. I mean, I don't see why she needed to do that, but
well, I think it's kind of cool, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of thing that she's very family-minded. My mother, for things like that, and I think she also wanted the female members of her, like her mother and her sister, nearby.
Yes,
because they're much more helpful. Well, they were in those days. Men weren't allowed in the birth, that kind of thing.
They weren't allowed at all.
They weren't allowed to be in the room when the mother was giving birth.
Good grief!
Yeah. And that only changed in the 60s, I think. And even then it was... Because my first child was born in 71, and I was in such a state seeing, the pain that the mother was going through, that the nurses said to me, it'll be 20 minutes or more yet. Why don't you go and have a 5-minute break? And I went into a little waiting room, lay down on the floor and fell asleep. And then when I woke up, the baby was already born.
Guy, that's amazing.
And it was probably right, because I was probably of no use, but I was much better prepared for my other children.
Yeah, well, you have jumped the gun a bit on that. We will talk about your children in a little bit. Before we do, tell us a story, my favourite story from your own childhood.
Well, a favourite story from my own childhood. My dad was in Malta for a couple of years, in 49 to 50 or thereabouts, for maybe 51, I think, And we lived in Slima, which is a place in Malta. And we lived in a little sort of terraced place there. And my dad came home from work one day and brought me a yellow lorry. And this was my favourite toy. The Lello Lolly, I called it.
Right, yeah. Good.
I was about 3 or something.
Amazing.
Yeah. And one day it disappeared, and my mother realised that somebody had stolen it, and she got her detective hat on, and she got it back for me.
Did you know who nicked it?
Well, she knew it was a Maltese family who nicked it off the window ledge or something.
Good grief!
Yeah. and on another occasion, I went to another naval friend, to play with their children, and I saw a wind-up gramophone, and I'd never seen any such thing, a gramophone, and my description of it was that a thing went round and round, and you wound it up, and music came out.
Okay,
it was a box, That was my childish description of a gramophone.
And 70 years later, you've got Spotify on your phone.
Well, exactly, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Brilliant. So the next question was, do you have children, which we know you do.
I have 4.
You have 4. Did you have a naming ceremony, a christening, or any other ceremony to welcome them into the world?
No, but therein lies another funny story. Firstly, when my first child was born, I was still just a Catholic. So he was actually christened in St. Paul's in Withington. By the time my second, third and fourth child came along, I was a Quaker.
Right.
Because I've only been a humanist for about 25 years.
Oh, only 25 years?
Something like that.
There are people coming on this podcast that haven't been alive 25 years, Guy.
Okay, well. Anyway, my mother was a devout Catholic when she was alive. I'm almost certain that she's done guerrilla baptisms for them.
Guerrilla baptisms?
Yes, I can.
Right, okay, explain guerrilla baptisms.
Well, in the Catholic belief system, anybody can baptise a baby. You don't have to be a priest.
Good grief, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it applies in other denominations, but that's certainly the case in Catholicism. So when we weren't looking, she could have just put a bit of water and say, I baptise thee in the name of Jesus Christ or something.
Good grief.
And that's effective. Effective to ensure that the child would not end up in limbo.
Right.
Or hell or somewhere. Limbo has since been abolished by the church.
Has it?
Yes.
Right, okay.
So maybe her efforts were of no avail, even within that belief system.
You genuinely think she did that?
I believe she did. Yeah.
So she didn't like you being a Quaker?
She respected the fact that I had changed, I mean, we used to have battles, but I was probably pretty aggressive with my parents, and that's probably why my daughter is being aggressive with me now.
And was she still around when you when you decided that you were humanist?
Yes.
And how did she cope with that?
She was only just. She died in 2000, and as I say, it was about mid-90s. Mm. No, she, I think she'd given up hope by then. I mean, my sister became an Anglican and is now an Anglican minister.
Okay, good grief! So you got very similar jobs, really.
Yes, it's really strange. And I did a funeral in London the other day, and she came along,
right?
And she was very complimentary. And she's learning to do funerals as part of her training as a minister.
Right. Amazing.
So my other 3 children were born when I was a Quaker.
And so you had no baptisms at all?
No baptisms.
No.
Within Quakerism, there's no christening or baptism at all. And they're a bit old now to suggest naming ceremonies.
Yes, I think so. So this question's a bit odd for someone of your... Let's go with... establishment. Would you do this? Word. So, if you were to have another child,
right?
Would you have a naming ceremony?
I would have a naming ceremony. I think, yes, I would definitely want to have that. Yeah.
Would you do it yourself, or would you ask another celebrant?
Oh, that's an interesting point. No, I think I'd ask another celebrant to do it. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because because then I could relax in the role of the father, the parent, as it were. Yeah.
What about grandchildren? Have any of your grandchildren? And had they been? They had naming ceremonies?
No, the first 2 were christened.
Right.
And I think by the time the 3rd one came along, my son and his wife had abandoned religion.
Right.
So I don't think she's had a christening or anything.
And again, if you were to become a grandparent again, would you do the ceremony or would you ask someone else?
I might do the ceremony for a grandchild.
It would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's never going to be a thing for me, unfortunately. No. But I think that's really lovely.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I must ask my son, actually. I don't recall there being a christening for the number 3.
Number 3?
Yeah. I mean, she's 10 now.
Yeah, a bit old for a naming ceremony, really.
Well, I've done one, actually, for a 9-year-old.
Okay, how did that one go about?
He was adopted. And then, but he'd been adopted for some years, and then his mother had a baby, and so she thought, well, let's do a combined.
That's
one.
Lovely,
and it was good because it kind of helped. He had a real role as the adopted one, the old one. It sort of cemented the family.
Yeah, like a confirmation of that this is our family.
Yeah, that's right.
So lovely.
Yeah, it was touching. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's move on to talk about weddings. And the first question is, are you married?
No.
Have you been?
I have been several times.
I thought several times. How many times? The fact that you have
2.5.
Well, now 2.5 is definitely something we're going to talk about. So elaborate on 2.5.
Well, but my first marriage was my first wife when we were Catholics.
Right.
So we had a Catholic wedding.
Okay.
Second wife when I was a Quaker.
Okay.
So we had a Quaker wedding.
Right.
And then I was living with a Muslim woman who wanted to get married, and and I didn't really want to get married. So we actually had a Muslim wedding. An Islamic wedding.
So it wasn't legally recognised?
Not legally recognised, so that's the half.
Oh, I'm not sure that's a half. I think that counts as a full. It certainly will to the Muslim community.
Well, it did to the Muslim community, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean...
She was a bit worried about living in sin.
Right.
Which I wasn't.
But were you humanist at this point?
I was a humanist, yeah.
And so she was more worried about living in sin than marrying an atheist?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Bizarre, really.
Fascinating.
I mean, except that as part of the as part of the marriage, I had to say I was a Muslim, which I managed to do because and actually I still know the words, so I'm technically a Muslim apostate.
Good grief!
So I'm happy with all the Muslim apostates around.
That's mad. That's fascinating.
So the words are La ilaha illa Allah va Muhammadu dun Rasulullah.
And that's just a statement that you're a Muslim.
It means there is no God except Allah,
right?
And Muhammad is his messenger, is the messenger of God. So but the bit I agree with is La ilaha, means there is no God.
I knew that was coming. Wow. You probably shouldn't say that to Muslim folk, I don't think. So, I mean, normally I would say tell me about your wedding day, but tell me about all three of your wedding days.
Well, the first marriage was really a mistake, I think. But anyway, you think of these things afterwards. It was all right. It was a smallish affair. It was in the Cambridge Catholic Church, and yeah, it was all right. It was quite nice. It was a requiem, not a requiem mass. Can't remember what do you call it, a wedding high mass sort of thing. Yeah. And my father-in-law was a lovely man. I've liked my father-in-laws in every case, except for the half one who I never met.
Okay.
So he was choir master. So there was a lot of lovely music.
Right. Okay.
And then we went off on a honeymoon to Paris. And in those days, the cheapest way to get there, this was before the Channel Tunnel,
of course,
was you went to Lyd Airport in Kent, and you got a quick flight over to Beauvais in France, and then you took the train or coach or something.
Right.
So that's what we did, and we had a week in Paris, and then we went to a sort of community called the Château de Charbonnières, where we worked our stay as sort of domestics. And we got really pissed off with that after about 3 weeks, and then we left and we hitchhiked to Germany.
Wow!
To visit a friend who was minding a house in the south of Germany.
How wonderfully romantic! That's lovely.
Yeah, that was good.
Okay, so tell me something about your second wedding.
The second wedding was the Quaker one in Wythenshawe Meeting House, South Manchester they call it now. Meeting houses those days probably still are teetotal. And we asked if we could have alcohol,
right?
Because we were going to have the actual reception in the meeting house as well. So we had dancing and all sorts of things, but we weren't allowed alcohol. So after that, we took all my boozy relatives back to our flat,
right,
in Didsbury, and plied them all with.
I mean, were you teetotal then? Because you're a Quaker?
No. It's just that's the central tradition of of Quakerism. I think it probably still is.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we went off to the Hawes in the Dales. Okay. Yeah. Wensleydale Hawes.
Yeah.
For our we had a sort of walking holiday.
That's a lovely day.
And the first morning we went down to breakfast, and all these people with their boots and rucksacks ready for serious walking. And the landlady, sort of B&B place, said, "How did wedding go yesterday?" Sort of thing. Brilliant. And we were sort of trying to hide.
Brilliant.
It was quite funny.
Adorable. Yeah. And the third one.
Third one was conducted actually not in a mosque. It was in somebody's house by a professor.
A professor.
A professor.
Not an imam.
Not an imam.
Okay.
No. It was a very traditional Iranian wedding with lots of food and a whole table full of things to eat and symbolic foods and stuff.
That one would have been teetotal as well, right?
Yeah. And there was lots of singing and dancing of women and sort of not quite ululating, but that kind of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I was even able to understand a bit of it because I'd studied Farsi for a bit and got to grips with it. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So for all three of them, what songs did you pick as your first dance?
I can't remember.
Really? You can't remember?
No, I don't remember. I mean, in the Quaker one, there was... we didn't have dancing in the Catholic one. You
didn't have a first dance at all?
No, we didn't have any dance.
Good grief.
In the Quaker one, we had barn dancing, and we had things like Dashing White Sergeant and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so that was fun. Yeah.
But again, you didn't have a proper first dance?
I don't recall it. Probably did, but I don't recall it now.
Wow.
Yeah. And we didn't do anything like that in the Islamic one.
No. I mean, I haven't spoken to any Muslims yet. Is that not a thing that Muslim weddings do?
They don't do dancing.
They don't do first dance?
Well, they don't do first dance. They don't do intersexual, intergender dancing anyway.
Oh, of course.
What dancing there is totally separate.
Good grief, of course.
This Muslim wedding was quite different from ones that I've seen before, where the couple hardly talk to each other. There's negotiations between the respective families. It's almost like a family contract, and the couple just happen to be the subjects of the contract.
Completely different.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the more sombre part of the podcast. We're going to talk about death. The first question is pretty loaded, but are you afraid of death?
No, I'm not. It's very interesting this, because I'm been wanting to talk to my children about death, and I have done with certainly two of them.
Yeah.
And but when you get into your 70s, you want to talk about death. You want to have it on the agenda. You're approaching the end of your life.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are humanists, it is a natural and final end. There's no afterlife.
Very much agree, funnily enough.
And I think the way to do it is stoically and with humour. And hopefully you're going to have a good death without too much pain and suffering, and you're going to have your family and your loved ones around, and you've made all your provisions so everybody's looked after. That's what I want. Now, I want to be able to have that on the table with my family.
Yeah.
And I think I've done it with most of my children, but I suspect my daughter is not adjusted. She doesn't want to hear about that. She's kind of, and with this coronavirus business.
Yes, of course.
She's kind of wanting to make sure I'm fully isolated and protected and etc.
I can't see you reacting well to that, Guy.
No, I'm not happy with that, and I'm thinking of joining the OAP guerrillas in the hills.
Right, okay.
To break out of that. but my ex-wife, her mother, is in a high risk category, because not only is she over 70, but she's also got lung damage.
Right.
She gets pneumonia easier. And
I believe that's what's going to be the killer in the end. Absolutely. Is the pneumonia, because of getting the virus rather than the virus itself. That's
right, yes. And so she's in a very high category, and I think everything needs to be done to protect her.
It's fascinating. I mean, this podcast's being recorded in March, and it won't really be going out until maybe May. And we're talking right in the kind of centre of the what's probably the start of everything. So I don't think it matters that this is dated, but for me, I'm completely empathise with your daughter. I've been mollycoddling my folks, and quite rightly, my dad told me off. But it's difficult for people, and I think when my dad, in a similar thing, in his 70s, he was started to talk about death. I was like, Dad, shut up, that's my dad. And that's the wrong attitude. And I have learnt from it, and I kind of now try and emphasise to people, talk to your parents about death. It's not about you and feeling uncomfortable. It's about them feeling comfortable.
Yes, that's right. That's good.
And my dad was right to start talking about it. My dad was right when I started to pester them when the coronavirus thing happened. He was right to tell me to back off. And I think it's not a respect your elders thing. I think it's more a think about how other people feel comfortable thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that I think it is difficult for intergenerational discussions about things like death. Sex is another difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I prefer to talk about death than sex with my dad.
But yeah,
I mean, obviously, my dad has no experience of the kind of sex I have, so that's another thing.
As you know.
No, I'm pretty damn sure. Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I'd much prefer to talk about death than sex with my dad. Oh dear.
No, death is an interesting one, because in a humanist funeral, we often talk about the way you live on. You do live on, not in a celestial afterlife, but obviously in people's hearts and memories and the stories and things like that. And I think I think it is worth talking about, and worth people who are worried about death or fearful to think this through and get adjusted to the reality that when you're in your 70s, you're facing a point in the relatively near future. I mean, my parents died in their 80s. One was 84 and the other one was 88. So
good.
On that basis, I've got another 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and you are as busy as I am. You've got so many hats that you wear for different things, and I think you retired and then started doing more work than when you were working, possibly.
No, I know. When I was working, throughout my working life, I've really worked hard, and I've been quite stressed, and I was really happy to retire and slow down a bit and do something.
So this is you slowed down, is it?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing things that I like doing rather than having to earn my bread,
And is that? I mean, do you restrict the number of ceremonies you do as a celebrant?
I don't promote myself really. I mean, so I'm doing maybe one a month or something like that. You know, and I'm quite happy to do that.
Right.
I don't really want to do much more than that. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm obviously much more ambitious than that, but I think there's room for all types of celebrants, and our diversity is what makes us strong.
Yeah.
You've got to realise that I could be the perfect celebrant for this wedding couple and completely inappropriate for the next couple, and the same for you, the same for any celebrant.
Yeah.
So this one, I'm guessing the answer is yes, considering how old you are, but have you ever experienced the death of a loved one? Is there anything you want to talk about regarding that?
My parents, obviously, have died, and my mother's death was thankfully short. It was a sort of heart attack type situation where she just went. She'd been unwell, but she'd led a reasonably normal life before then. So that's brilliant.
And you said she was 82?
84.
84?
Case, yeah. But my dad had dementia over 6 or more years, and that was a painful, sad. It was a death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah,
horrible way to go. I mean, he had been a research scientist at one point in his life. After he left the Navy. Well, even in the Navy at one point he was doing research. But
and having experienced both of those two ways of losing a loved one, is there a huge difference between how you feel and how it affected you?
Well, I think when someone has a wasting disease and decline, you're living the death. It's not sudden. It's not a shock, and you get used to it. And so when they finally go, it's a release, and you're happy for them. Whereas if they suddenly go, that's a bit more. It is a bit more of a shock when you weren't ready for it quite.
Yeah. And so they both are grim in their own separate ways, I guess.
Yeah. I think for my father, it was really grim to have that experience of this dementia, because for the first year or two, he was quite defensive and he was in denial.
Right.
I mean, it was really difficult to get him off the road for good,
Right.
Like that, I mean, I used to go down and see him, between myself and my siblings, we sort of. Because he lived on his own and he wanted to stay living on his own, so he kept having to put more care in, once a day, then twice a day, and then live-in care and all this kind of stuff. And I used to go down regularly, and right at the beginning, before we managed to get him out of his car had scrapes down both sides.
Right.
And the wing mirrors were sort of falling off. And he showed me this tape. He said, "Oh, this is good stuff, this tape." He said, "I use it to bind up my wing mirrors."
Right.
It was very funny at times.
Yeah.
One time he invited one of my siblings and her husband to a meal, and he served up 3 puddings, one after the other. That was the meal.
I mean, I could definitely go for that meal.
Oh,
dear me.
Oh dear.
So let's move on to talking about your funeral. Do you want to be buried or cremated or something else? I've had quite a lot of something else's, actually.
I've donated my body to medical science, so if they accept it when the time comes.
Right, and how do you go about that?
Well, in my case, I got in touch with Manchester University medical faculty and filled in a form, And that's basically it. That's
When did you make that decision?
Oh, at least 10 years ago. I can't remember. Maybe 20 years ago. Yeah.
And why is that important to you?
Well, I rather fancy the idea of my body continuing to have some use,
Right,
for a while, and then when they're finished with it, then there is a cremation, which I think or you can have it buried, but I'm happy to have it cremated, and they will pay for that, I think,
right,
as well. So I'm assuming there will be some sort of memorial.
Yeah.
But after I die, which is up to my.
Did you discuss this with your family, or did you feel like it was a personal choice?
I've just told them.
Right, okay.
I might need to tell them again because they've probably forgotten now.
Right. Kind of written it off as like, he'll change his mind.
I put it in the will as well. So,
right.
No, I think that sounds like a good idea. And these days, there's a bit of a move towards ashes-centred funerals anyway.
Yes.
Were I not doing that, I'd be quite attracted to the natural burial ground option of burial with, in a natural burial ground.
Yes.
And there's a lovely one over towards Orms, on the East Lancs. I forgot the name of the place.
Is it the one in
Green Gates or something?
Is it the one in Rossendale? Or am I getting myself confused?
No, that's another one.
Right.
No, this is off the East Lancs towards Liverpool. It's about halfway to Liverpool.
Right.
Just forgotten the name of it.
No, I know the one you mean, but I can't remember it either.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people now considering alternative ways of what they're going to do to cremation or a burial, and I think the medical science one is great. If you can do some good when you're not even around anymore, that's amazing, really.
Yeah, well, and as one of the slides in my talk says, have it your way.
Exactly.
Have it your way. There's a lot of choice these days around funerals.
Yeah.
And of course, with this coronavirus, they're talking now about having funerals with only maybe the immediate family there.
Yeah.
And then everybody else looks at it online.
Well, I've got a booking later on this month, which was originally going to be a burial with just the family, followed by a large memorial in a town hall, and that's become a burial because the body needs to be buried. So the same burial I would have done, and the other event's been postponed. But they want me to come back, even if it's 6 months down the line, to do this memorial for their son. And I think the original idea was great. I think that having two separate ceremonies is a really nice idea. But the fact that they're keeping the second ceremony, I think even 6 months on, people will want it. People will need it. So it is uncertain times for everybody involved in the funeral industry at the moment, because we've had no guidelines. We certainly will have had guidelines by the time this comes out, but still, it's an interesting one.
I mean, that's clearly one option, because I think this business of online funerals, which has been possible anyway in many crematoriums, but is rarely used.
No.
I'm not sure why not. Because there's lots of people who have relatives in America or Australia or Canada or places where in the online option could really be a good idea.
The thing is, you can attend Comic-Con via an online thing. You can...
What's Comic-Con?
Comic-Con is where they
the comedians?
No, like comic books and...
right.
So they make the big announcements for Marvel films and all that live in front of an audience, but you can tune in on that. You can, they do a live stream of university graduations. There are lots of things, lots of ceremonies and lots of big public things where people would want to be there that are streamed, and it seems really odd that the funeral industry is behind on that.
Yeah, I think they're behind on many things, but I mean, I think it would be. I mean, when I started doing it, we were normally paid in cash in brown envelopes.
Good grief!
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of funeral directors still pay me by cheque.
Yes.
And up until I started being a funeral celebrant, I don't think I'd had a cheque in 10 years. No. And now it's almost a norm.
And cheques are really awkward and annoying.
You walk into a bank with a cheque and you think... You feel like you've walked in with like a tape deck or something, Yeah. It's something so antiquated from my childhood to that. But you're right. So, what reading would you like to be read at your funeral?
Ooh, I haven't really given this much thought, but I've chosen my music.
Okay, that is the next question. Let's move on to that then. What music tracks do you think you'd have for your entrance reflection and your exit?
I rather fancy the Chopin's Funeral March, a bit of pomp and ceremony.
Right, okay, the classic.
The sort that you're probably too young, but in was it the 80s? Yeah,
I grew up in the 80s.
Oh well, there was a series of Russian presidents who got appointed and then promptly died.
Right.
It was about 3 in a row.
I actually learnt that in history.
Yeah. And each time there was this Chopin's Funeral March. Da, 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 dum, da, da, da.
Yes.
And I
the
thought,
classic.
wow, I want that. And it's a bit of a piss take as well, somehow. Anyway.
And it's very you doing a piss take for your own funeral.
Well, then for the contemplative bit, the most beautiful piece of classical music ever, I think, is Dvorak's American String Quartet. Go for the slow movement. It's absolutely, it's idyllic. And then at the end, when people hopefully, they've had all their emotions.
Yes.
If they're going to be emotional, I don't know.
Yeah. I will be.
I want the Muppet song.
So, starting with the funeral march, then a legitimately lovely piece of music, followed by the fucking Muppets. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, good. I agree. I couldn't agree more. It will certainly be a memorable funeral with those three, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you need to think about what you want reading at your funeral.
Well, I'm not sure if there'll be much.
You'll have a bank of poems that you'll have read at other people's funerals for.
Yes. Because I'm not going to be at my funeral.
You're not. No.
As they say, they say such nice things about you at your funeral. It's a pity you're going to miss yours.
Yeah, quite.
I know. Another quote from my talk.
Indeed.
So I give a talk on called Strictly Die Laughing, and you've done it for me.
I have.
In one case as well.
I've adapted it to make it a little bit more me, but it's fantastic. Fantastic
good fun.
Talk.
It addresses death and humanism, but also the range of different types of funeral, and also the fact that we are a less religious society than we used to be. So what do you do? What do you believe, and what sort of ceremonies do you have? And obviously, the humanist ceremony is one answer.
I mean, I think it's the best option, personally.
Well, I think so too.
I'm going to have one.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. So, I haven't given enough thought to readings. There are some amazing readings around, and most funerals that I've done don't have readings, but do have a bit of poetry.
Yes.
And a little bit of poetry is probably quite good, especially to calm people down a bit. But I have to think about readings, and I haven't really had a thought about that.
So, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Guy. Before we go, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, as far as the humanist ceremonies are concerned, Humanists UK have a ceremonies sort of sub-website called Humanist Ceremonies. And if people want a ceremony, they can certainly find me by clicking on what sort of ceremony they want, and then they put their postcode in a little box, and then the local celebrants will be listed.
Right next to me.
Absolutely, and I now live in Littleborough.
Right.
So, which is part of Rochdale.
So not so close to me anymore.
No, I used to obviously live closer to you. So I'm certainly available in this area, and I mean I could even go over to Yorkshire.
You're kind of in between the two now, right?
Yeah, as long as I've got my passport ready,
Your blue passport. No, we don't talk about that on this podcast.
Oh dear. So that's one way of finding me. I mean, I'm also, if you put my name in the internet, you will find all sorts of things.
What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, it's at Guy _Otten, I think.
Right. GUI_OTTEN. Is that right?
I think so. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I don't use Twitter that much. I'm much more visible on Facebook.
I'm fond of Twitter. I always have been.
Yeah.
Do you have an Instagram, anything like that?
I do, but I don't really use Instagram. I just follow people on Instagram. I look at, especially quite a lot of celebrants have some really good stuff there.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in having especially a wedding or a naming, there's some beautiful stuff on there.
Yeah. I need to get better at Instagram, and I say that every time.
Yes, I could do with, doing that, but no, I'm happy not to press my case too much. And there are people like yourself sort of making more of a living out of it. You need to obviously do it, but I mean, in one of these days, I will probably retire as a celebrant and just do the odd one that people particularly ask me to do or something like that.
Will you keep the chaplaincy when you do that?
Well, I don't know. You see, a lot depends on my health and so forth.
Well, if people are interested in chaplaincy, how can they find out more information?
Well, that's again through Humanists UK. They have a care department, if you like, or public service.
So it's just through
Humanist
the website.
Care Department, I think it's called. Yeah,
and humanism.org.uk then is the first stop.
That's right. That's the Humanist UK website, humanism.org.uk, and then in there is this department, and in that department are humanist ceremonies as well as chaplaincy and things like Faith to Faithless, which is a project that focuses on looking after and giving a sort of support to people leaving whatever faith they've been indoctrinated into in the past. And I mean, what people can do if they're interested in humanist chaplaincy is, you can come and talk to somebody like me, and then if you're interested in training with a view to being either a volunteer or even a paid chaplain, because there's probably about 300 or 250, 300 volunteers, and about a dozen or 15 of us are actually paid in one form or another to do chaplaincy in prisons and hospitals and stuff. And in my area, in the northwest, which is the area that I'm involved with, we've actually have someone who's seconded to do university chaplaincy. Right. UCLAN, Lancashire University, something.
It's in Preston.
Central Lancashire.
Yeah, UCLAN in Preston.
UCLAN, that's the one, yeah. So that's rather good.
And Greater Manchester Humanist, is it just a case of typing that into Facebook?
Yes, you can do that. We also have a meetup where we put all our meetings, which is www.greater-manchester-humanists. The trouble is that we've had to abandon our meetings for the moment because of this coronavirus.
But that won't be forever.
Well, hopefully not, no. I don't know what the future holds, because they can't suppress it for 18 months, I don't think. I can't see how that's going to work. They can suppress it for a few months, and then, in the summer it might be less vigorous, but come next autumn it's going to come back, I think.
We don't know what the future will hold. It is scary times. Yeah. And maybe we need to talk about death a little bit more.
Well, I mean, the one I've seen, this thing that this piece of research that Imperial College or somewhere like that has done with Professor Neil Ferguson, who's now himself got the virus, it turns out.
Well, there's an irony in that, isn't there?
Well, he's been working so hard to advise government. Their prediction was it could be as many as 250,000 people dying.
That's obscene amounts, isn't it?
But the problem there is that, and I think people need to sort of get it into perspective. We cannot guarantee that we are immune from death.
No.
Death is something that's there. And it's easier to see when you're at my age. It's when you're young, it's very hard to accept that, because you've got your whole life in front of you, you're healthy. This is not part of your plan.
Yeah. It's very kind of you to call me young, thanks.
You are young.
Comparatively, maybe. Yeah. So, Guy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been fascinating, and this is what I love about this, is that all my friends are so different that it's the same questions every week, but it's a completely different interview. So thank you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Life's Milestones. I've been your host, Mark, and I really think that Guy was a great way to start the podcast with his 3 marriages and his wonderful stories. And I'd just like to add that, I have started with a celebrant colleague of mine for the first episode, But I have no more celebrants planned in the near future. I want this podcast to be completely diverse. I want people from all different socio-economic backgrounds. I want men, I want women, I want religious folk, I want non-religious folk. I want gay, I want straight, I want anything that you can think of. I want this podcast to be diverse. I also want to support my friends and people that I know that have small businesses. So you will see a number of small business owners on this podcast. Essentially, though, I just want interesting people, and I'm fortunate enough in all the work that I do to be able to meet a lot of fascinating and interesting people who have got great stories about their life's milestones. So thank you for listening to the show. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, it's at Life's Milestones. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at MarkAdamsHC. You can also find me on Facebook if you search for Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant, and you can find my website at www.humanist.org.uk/Mark Adams. The podcast network can be found at We Made This Pod on Twitter. And if you go to Spreaker.com/We Made This, that's where you'll find all the other We Made This shows. That's all I've got time for on Life's Milestones this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Previously on the We Made This network. Cinemortuary.
So if you're going to get him a birthday present, way too late. Sorry, Dave, I didn't get you a birthday present.
So I'll take one in April.
Okay.
There's some WrestleMania spoilers then, you dick. Yeah, so my pick this week is a little present to you, Dave, because you've had a hard time with some of our picks, recently. Chris?
He gave us a video game.
Yes.
Sorry, two blokes in their early 30s that can't play a video game. I said that to a room full of people earlier, and they were just like, what the fuck? This is a room full of blokes in their 30s.
We've got lives. I mean, what do them blokes in the 30s
You're not
do?
working at the minute.
Well, no, I'm not. No, probably the way it's fucking going, I still won't do it. This episode goes out.
What'd you pick?
Predator 2.
Ah.
Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast.
I just think she was awful from day one. She didn't get any better. And, I mean, her quite naff death as well, where she has a brief little skirmish with Seven and gets kicked to her death. I was a bit like, well, you know what? I care so little about that character that that's fairly fitting, really.
Yeah, I
for
thought
me.
that. Yeah, I thought, well, that's good. Good that that's out the way.
Yeah, shrug.
That's
exactly. Yeah, me too. I was like, oh, thank God for that. Like, let's get on with everything else now. Now she's gone.
We Buy Records.
Well, I've seen some people saying that they're not posting anything out at the moment because they don't want to cause unnecessary burden on the postal service.
A friend of ours is a postal worker, and he said at the end of last week that week just gone had been like Christmas in the sorting office, and not in a good way.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.